Well, welcome everyone to the first of this year's Burlington House Lunchtime Scientist Talks. My name is Lucinda, and I work at the Royal Astronomical Society, which encourages the study of astronomy, solar system science, geophysics, and other closely related branches of science.
Yeah, hello everyone, and my name is Joe. I work at the Linnean Society, which aims to inform, involve, and inspire people about nature and its significance through our special collections that we have in our building in Burlington House, as well as our programs and scientific publications.
But this is a really cool collaboration between the Royal Astronomical Society and the Linnean Society, which we both live in Burlington House, which is this great big building in the center of London, in this really exciting space called Piccadilly. And as you can tell, I'm from California, so it's a wonderful place to work and experience as someone who didn't grow up here in the UK. But we're alongside other cultural organizations such as the Royal Academy of Art, the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Geological Society, and the Society of Antiquaries. And the Linnean Society and the RAS have co-produced the series for young people, GCSE, A Level. I know we've got other members of the public with us today, and that's okay too, especially if you're scientists. But for people who have an interest in astrobiology to learn about this exciting field and the variety of careers that people can have.
I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping, if that's okay. This webinar is taking place live. Some of you are on Zoom in a webinar, and you can register for our future webinars by looking at our websites. But we're also streaming onto YouTube, so you might be watching on YouTube or perhaps on a different social media platform like Twitter or Facebook. If you are watching this live, hi, you can type questions or comments into the Q&A boxes or the chat boxes, and we will have a look out for those. And we can bring those up to our speaker to try and answer them at the end or throughout, if that makes sense. Our speaker today is Professor Karen Olsson-Francis, and we're really excited to have her. Karen is a microbiologist by training, and her focus of research is about life at the limits. She's interested in microorganisms that live in extreme environments here on Earth, as well as at the International Space Station. Her work with environments on Earth helps our understanding of extraterrestrial locations. Her talk is What is Astrobiology? A very broad title there. So thank you very much for joining us, Karen, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for inviting me here today to talk about astrobiology. So, as everyone said, my name's Karen Olsson-Francis. I'm a professor of actually geomicrobiology at the Open University in Milton Keynes. I think I was asked to give this talk because I'm also director of Astrobiology OU, which is a multidisciplinary research group with over 50 members at the Open University that recently was awarded just under £7 million. So we're kind of quite a big group within the UK. Internationally, I'm also the UK representative on the COSBAUER Planetary Protection Panel, which is something that I will mention later on as well. Okay then, shall we get started with, I suppose, the big question, what is astrobiology? Okay, so are we alone in the universe is one of the most fundamental questions of our time and is the driving force behind the emerging field of astrobiology. For thousands of years, humans have gazed up into the skies and wondered about the presence of life beyond the Earth. Philosophers and scientists have pondered and argued, not just about life elsewhere, but about origins of life and evolutionally on Earth. And now if we fast forward to present day, with access to space becoming more accessible, an increasing number of missions is evolving, our understanding of the universe is evolving, and so is the field of astrobiology. So astrobiology is a relatively new discipline. It is truly interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, if you'd like to call it. You can't study it at school, but it does bring together some of the traditional disciplines you will be learning. Biology, physics, geology, maths, chemistry, all these subjects are needed to be a part of astrobiology. The prime aim of the field is to further our understanding of the origins and evolution of life, not just on Earth, but elsewhere. It covers a range of diverse topics, from the origins of life, searching for habitable environments elsewhere in the solar system and beyond, detecting life, what molecules or biosignatures can we use to find evidence of life elsewhere. It's also about prebiotic chemistry. So what about where the precursors for life exist? And as I mentioned at the beginning, planetary protection also fits within here. This is something that you may think, planetary protection sounds something like a superhero would do. I'm definitely not one of those, but it's important because it means that we need to protect planets that we go and visit. So to make sure that contamination from Earth does not contaminate these other planets. And also, when we're thinking about sample return missions, it's also really important to make sure that we don't contaminate our own planet with terrestrial life. And over the coming weeks, throughout this series of talks that have been organised, you will hear about experts within each of these fields, and these will be some of the topics that will be covered. So with no unambiguous evidence of life has yet been found elsewhere in the solar system or beyond, we do know that the chemical building blocks for life have been detected in a wide range of extraterrestrial environments. Meteorites have been found that contain organic amino acids and sugars. Both of these comments are the building blocks for proteins, which are the biological molecules that give structure and functions to cells. On early Earth, here's kind of an artistic vision of what early Earth could have looked like. It's thought that the first, and on early Earth, it's thought that organic molecules were produced to produce the building block of life. Some of you may have studied the Miller-Urey experiment as part of your studies. This was kind of developed in the 1950s, where Stanley Miller and Harold Urey demonstrated that some of these key building blocks could actually be simulated under an early Earth condition. There is, however, a large leap between organic building blocks and life on early Earth. And we have no solid evidence to show how life actually originated. What we do know, though, is single-cell microorganisms are thought to have been the first form of life on Earth. Evidence consists of their, we can find evidence of their existence in rocks, which are about 3.7 billion years old today. And nowadays, we know that microbes basically live everywhere. There's predicted to be 5 million trillion microbe cells currently on Earth. And this image here that you can see in front of you is actually taken by a scanning electron microscope, which is a really powerful microscope. And each, like these pink cells are about 20 microns long. And this is actually the microbes that grow have been isolated from a mobile phone. So, microbes are everywhere in everyday life. And when we think about potential life beyond the Earth, as scientists, we kind of think life would look a bit more like this rather than the green alien-like forms that we hear about in sci-fi movies. And as mentioned at the beginning, I'm a microbiologist by background. So when you ask anyone who works in astrobiology what astrobiology is, to each of them, depending on their background, depends on the answer they'll give. So for me personally, I'm interested in astrobiology from the idea of understanding how microbes can live and adapt to extreme environments, and if habitable environments can exist elsewhere in the solar system. I'm particularly interested in microbes that live in really extreme environments. These are kind of like the superheroes of the microbial world. They can live in some of the most extreme environments. For example, we have organisms called hyperthermophiles, which can live at temperatures up to 122 degrees. And these can be found in kind of geothermic environments. We have microbes that can live and survive in really cold environments. For example, if we looked at microbes in the bottom of your freezer, it wouldn't surprise me if we would find some evidence there as well. They can also survive at high pH and low pH. So, for example, really acidic environments such as vinegar, wouldn't surprise me if you could find microbes in environments that have a similar pH to that. And we also find microbes at the bottom of the ocean. And what we do is draw on this information that we know about life on Earth to further our ability to find evidence elsewhere. So looking at this information, what we know that life in general needs 3 basic ingredients. We know it needs liquid water, which is essential for cellular processes, because it's involved in a number of biochemical processes. It's also involved in removing waste and byproducts from the cell. Cells also need these key ingredients: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. The sulfur and nitrogen are needed for some key amino acids. Phosphate is needed for lipids and also is a key part of the ATP molecule, which is the kind of currency of the cell. And the carbon and the oxygen are needed to build organic material. And kind of the final ingredient that we need is an energy source that will allow biochemical cycle processes to occur. Now, as humans, every time you eat food or you breathe in oxygen, you respire, you produce energy which you can use, your body uses. But microorganisms can use more than just organics and oxygen for energy. They can use inorganic compounds to produce energy, such as iron and sulfate. And on Earth, we also have plants which produce energy through photosynthesis from energy from the sun. Okay, so I've kind of given you a basic biology 101 there about life and the key building blocks. But how can this inform us about what lives beyond the Earth? Well, one of the major concepts for missions is a follow the water strategy. And this is something that's been used for years, and it's still the key driving force for exploration when we're looking for evidence of life. Planets that have liquid water are found in the habitable zone. So there's Earth. We have, and this is kind of also called the Goldilocks zone. So it's conditions which is not, it's not too cold, it's not too hot, it's just fine to have liquid water. Obviously, Mars does not have liquid water on, but we know from robotic missions that there is evidence of past water on Mars and potentially in the subsurface of Mars as well. But also beyond the habitable zone, we are aware of icy moons, for example, of that of Jupiter and Saturn. You can see here in the top right corner. And what we know from evidence from recent missions is that they have this thick layer of ice, and underneath that there's kind of an ocean of water which is protected from the detrimental conditions of space. And potentially within these environments, they could have these key building blocks that we need for life. And predictions based on the chemistry and the observations that we've had from different missions suggest that these conditions would be conducive to life to exist. Okay, I'm not going to focus too much on the icy moons because I only have 20 minutes here. But what I want to do is talk to you more about Mars. And the reason I've chosen Mars for this is because we know a lot more about it. We've had numerous missions to Mars over the last 50 to 60 years. And this has been through a combination of flybys and rovers, which have given us more information about the geology of the planet and about the atmosphere. And this is really important so we can start looking at if we want to think about habitability and if life could actually exist. So originally, back in the 70s, the Viking mission, their main aim was to characterize the structure, to look at the surface, and they find evidence that there could have been liquid water on the surface. And Mars is a really exciting time at the moment because we've recently got a new mission there. We have a number of kind of ongoing missions there, but recently back in February, had Mars 22, this is a picture of the Perseverance rover, land on Mars. And what's really exciting about this from a scientific perspective is, yes, we have this rover that has lots of instrumentation on it, which can characterize different aspects of the geology and look for potential biosignatures. But what is really interesting about this is that it's going to catch these samples from the moon, up from the surface. So it will identify area of interest, scoop parts of it up, put them into these kind of tubes and leave them on the surface of Mars. And the idea is that later on, what's going to happen is in a few years' time, we'll send a mission back to Mars with a fetch rover that will collect those samples and then bring them back to Earth to analyze. Okay, so all these missions has given us a really strong evidence of of the conditions on Mars. So today we know that Mars is a cold desert environment. But 40 billion years ago, when it was younger, the conditions on Mars may have been more similar to that on Earth. Geological and observational data suggest time periods that had a thicker atmosphere and the evidence of a more clement and less oxidizing condition, and was warm enough to support oceans of liquid water, which, as I mentioned before, are critical ingredients for life. It's unknown if the condition was feasible for life to exist for long enough, but life could have emerged on Mars or been transferred by a process called lithopanspermia from Earth to Mars, which had been seeded. But as Mars' atmosphere gradually eroded by solar winds, liquid water was unable to persist on the surface due to the low atmosphere pressure and surface temperature. Although there's evidence that suggests that briny solutions could produce transient forms of water on the surface nowadays, if we think about Mars today in the context of water, we think more about in the subsurface environments where it could exist. So life did evolve on early Mars like it did on Earth. We could potentially find evidence of that on the surface of Mars, or we could potentially find it in the subsurface where it is protected by the detrimental conditions. But I think it's really important to think about this, though, is, we need a lot of evidence to say that there's life on Mars, and we need to be really strong about our belief. So some of you may remember a few years ago, there was this report from NASA that we have methane on the atmosphere of Mars, which is true. That there is a debate that methane is available in the atmosphere on the surface of Mars. On Earth, methane is predominantly produced by life, by biotic processes. For example, the picture here of the cow is that we know that microbes live within the cow gut and produce methane. So what we need to do is, although we know that this can happen, it can also be produced by abiotic processes. And what we need to make sure is when we hypothesize that life does exist on Mars, we need to make sure we have strong evidence with a number of different threads. And for what this we need to have we need to have strong evidence of biosignatures. So this is kind of evidence of life. And there's a number of biosignatures that we could use. So if you think about life on Earth, prime examples that you'll think about are potentially stromatolites, and these are structural formations which microbes live in, and they cement rock and sand materials together, and you can visualize them in shallow water. Biomineralization is another example. So some organisms produce kind of hard structures to protect themselves in the environment. So shells, again, is an example of that. And what we do when we go to Mars is that we look for biosignatures using the techniques that we can on the rovers. I'm not saying we're going to have large biomineralization and large structures on Mars. What we're probably more looking like is evidence of microbial activity in the record, in the rock record. This could be something like the microbes changing the local environment through growing and hence causing a change in the geology of the rock sample. Another example is looking at patterns of organics, which using instruments like Raman and FJR, we can start to look at detecting if organics could exist, can be detected. Now, if we want to look at organics on Mars, we really kind of need to get below the subsurface, because organics are generally destroyed by the high radiation levels at the surface. So missions are really expensive. They cost millions and millions of pounds. We can't go there all the time. So what we do as astrobiologists, we use a combination of techniques that we can use on Earth, which means that we can carry out controlled environments and use that information to feed into our understanding and interpreting these data for Mars. So here's a picture of me up on the left, standing in a salt pool in Ethiopia collecting samples. And this is an example where it's an analog site. So this is a really salty environment, and potentially we think about highly saline environments could have existed within the transition of Mars from earlier to present day Mars, and where life potentially could exist. We also have Mars environmental simulation chambers, and we combine all this to combine all this to get an understanding of biosignatures and life and modelling for space missions. So prime examples of this is the modelling. So what we do, this is something that we do in my group, is we take information from the rovers or the data that we get from Mars. Here's a picture of the MSL rover. And we take that information of the geology, of the composition of the rocks. And what we can do is model the potential water composition that would have existed based on the chemistry. And this is something that my colleagues do. And from that, what we can do is kind of predict the composition of the water on Mars. And from that, we can then grow microbes to determine if microbial life could exist in there. We also use analog sites. So this is a picture. One of them is Mars and one of them isn't, is on Earth. And it'd be interesting to see if you can tell which is which. But what we do, the one on the right is actually Earth. And what we do is that we use kind of environments on Earth which are geologically similar to that would have a potential habitable environment we're trying to study, to start to understand. So in this picture here, they're doing analysis. They're doing a technical test where they're looking at if the technologies that they're developed to take to Mars in this instance could actually work. So they're kind of doing like a mission control. But as a microbiologist and environmental scientist, I'm more interested in the actual environment. So what microbes could live in those areas, what biosignatures could be produced in those areas, and start to get an understanding from taking that information to understanding what we know. So a prime example of that is some work that members of my team have done, is looking at the Arctic environment. So the Arctic is a polar desert, which has a continuous permafrost on it. And this kind of simulates some of the conditions that we may have had associated with Mars. And the water is really sulfur rich there. Again, something based on the modelling we predict in regions of Mars could have existed. And what we can do from that is build hypotheses about what life could have potentially have existed on early Mars and what biosignatures it could have to live in, it could produce. So for example, the work we did on here demonstrated using molecular techniques that the microbial community in these environments is dominated by microorganisms that use sulfur. So remember I mentioned back at the beginning about how we use organics from food and oxygen. Microbes that live in these environments depend on sulfur for growth and metabolism. So we predicted based on that, we can then predict the kind of biosignatures and impact they'd have and how we could detect them. So that's kind of an example of some of the analog work we can do. But analog work, in nature, we know is not consistent. There's lots of heterogeneity around that. So what we do in parallel is we can use lab simulations experiments. Now, this lets us fine-tune the conditions that we want to study, and it also allows us to study different parameters which we wouldn't generally be able to monitor in the environment. So here's some examples of small simulation chambers that we have at the Open University. And within them, we can simulate different conditions. We've got low pressure, temperature, radiation. And it allows us to look at microbial survival and biosignature detection in these chambers. So seeing if any of the biosignatures that we have would break down in these conditions. And we can use this information to refer back to the mission data as well. I've been lucky enough as well throughout my career to not just do work in the lab simulation experiments. I've also been involved in experiments in low Earth orbit. So I've had been involved in big experiments on the International Space Station, which we've had experiments on the outside of the space station, looking at seeing if microbes can survive and biosignatures and what impact that would have. I've also been involved in a project which basically had a big ball being orbited around Earth and then came smacking back on Earth to look at the impact of low Earth orbit and impact on microbial communities as well. This, you would think that this is quite novel, but I think there's something over 1,000 microbial species that have been in space over the last 40 years or so. So there's a lot of work going on there, because what we can't do on Earth, which we can only do in low Earth orbit, is simulate, is to look at radiation, which is something we have difficulty simulating on Earth. So in each of these little containers, you can see on the bottom right, have little containers which contain environmental samples or microbial samples. I actually, as part of my work, took a part of a cliff from Devon, a place called Beer, and sent it into space to look if any of the microbes could survive. So this is a lot of ongoing work that we do with EAST at the moment as well. Okay, so this is kind of the wrap up of astrobiology, and I think the main point I want to show to you is that astrobiology at this moment in time is a really interesting and exciting area to be in. We've got so many missions coming up to Mars sample return, to the icy moons. We've not even mentioned exoplanets, but now is a really exciting time to be involved in this field. And I think this is, and I think over the next century or so, I think we can all play a key part in answering this question: are we alone in the universe? And as I mentioned, I think astrobiology is a really, really diverse topic. And I think one of the key points I want to put across here is that at school you can't do A Level or a GCSE in astrobiology, but each part of the work that you do, in sciences contributes to that overall need within astrobiology. So I found this diagram, which was really interesting, and it kind of showed if anyone is actually interested in astrobiology, I hope I have kind of made you think about it a bit, is that how to become an astrobiologist, really. And I think at a teenage stage, the idea is, to read about it, listen to podcasts, come to seminars like this. I mean, I have to admit, when I was a teenager, I actually didn't want to become an astrobiologist. I wanted to study dolphins. So if you are interested, learn more about it. And because at university level, there's nowhere in the UK that actually does a degree in astrobiology as such. So what normally happens is that someone would do a degree in different aspects of astrobiology, different aspects. So you could do a chemistry degree, biology degree, and then build your area of expertise and then go into astrobiology. So kind of get your core area of where you want to go and then study astrobiology. But even if you are not a scientist, but are still interested in the whole concept of life elsewhere and where we go from there, in my group, I have a number of social scientists involved in the team. So, for example, there's a picture up on the right here of me. We, in our extreme environment analog sites, we've been doing a lot of work with Indigenous communities and about teaching them about STEM using astrobiology and their natural environment. We also, there's lots of questions that we can ask about the governance of space, who has the right to go to space. And as we open up to more individuals having the capability, you've got Blue Marble, et cetera, going into space, we need to start asking those kind of questions. So I think over the next 10 years or so, the social scientists are going to be becoming more involved in this whole area as well. And if anyone is interested, and I don't know, Joe, if you want me to do this now, but I did do a little diagram showing my career path if anyone is interested, or we can leave that till later. Joe, I will take your advice on that.
Hello, that was so fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. I think we've definitely got, we can talk about your career path and maybe that video that popped up there as well.
Yeah, I want to see the video now.
So thank you so much. And it's great to see the breadth of what astrobiology can mean to different people and what it means to you as well. We'll have a look at the Q&A box and I will pick a nice question from there.
So while you do that, Joe, shall I just say my career path probably isn't what you think. I grew up in a rural village in North Wales. My parents didn't go to university. I didn't get the A levels I wanted. I went through clearing. At university, I was diagnosed as being dyslexic. I didn't do the traditional trajectory. I took a year out, went traveling, ended up doing a PhD in New Zealand, and didn't want to do astrobiology straight away. I mean, my interest in astrobiology extreme environments happened in New Zealand, but my first postdoc was looking at stopping cows producing methane, basically stopping them farting. So yeah, you'd think there's no link between Mars and cows, but there's a huge link in the microbiology. And then, you know, I again didn't make good careers. I took another year out. I've done a lot of traveling, and I think, you know, don't always rush to where you go, I think is the message. And I've had a couple of children, and I think the caring point was having a fellowship and then getting this big grant. And, you know, within the space of 3 years, I've gone from a lecturer to a professor. And it was quite worrying for me when I Googled a professor online and found they were all grey-haired white male professors. So I just wanted to put that up there and going, you know what, you can do whatever you want, you know. And I think if you're interested in astrobiology, you don't have to, you know, there's no straight career path to do that. And I think that's something I hope you guys can take away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that in my experience with astrobiology, I was interested in astrogeology as a young student, and the people who mentored me were all astronomers, also interested in astrobiology, only because they were interested in exploring space further beyond Earth. And that's kind of what kind of put it on. Were you going to share that video on astrobiology?
I wasn't going, it's up to you, but I'll just make the background. Apparently this is a Lego version of me, just putting that out there. So we have a video, which I will, I haven't put the link in here, but we have a video that we've made about a 3-minute Lego video about astrobiology and what it is. I think I've got the link here. If you want me to play it, I could, or we could let people look at it at a later date. Or should we see how the questions go and we can go from there? Would that be easier?
I think it's a good end video.
Yeah, I agree with Joe.
So let's go through the questions just so we don't get in as many as we can and don't miss any out.
Because yeah, they are adding up here. I think we have like a good deal 5 in here, and then check our YouTube how that's going as well. Joe, did you want to start off?
Yeah, I was looking at a couple here from Jade and Elif, and they were talking about careers, I guess, and access into astrobiology, which you've touched on. Jade asked, what's the best way to get involved in astrobiology, which you'll have an opinion on. Whereas Elif is talking about how to proceed from being a master's student, so definitely progress a lot further. So I'm interested in the community of people that are around you and how different people have arrived in the same sphere as you have.
So astrobiology in the UK is kind of a really growing community, and we've got this Astrobiology Society of Britain, which is quite active, and we have a website there as well, which I will try and find and put in the chat. And that demonstrates all the different groups across the UK that are doing related stuff to astrobiology, because it's obviously not just us. And I think the best way to do is, like, we take summer students on, or, you know, I think to start with, it's just learning about the topics and what aspects that you want to get into, and having a good understanding of one of the traditional disciplines really helps with that. But we have summer students, and the other universities have it. The Astrobiology Society of Britain has scholarships for that as well. So having some kind of life hands-on experience is really good. And the NASA websites are really good for getting career advice as well. And I think from a master's perspective, it would be finding a PhD if you're interested in that, in astrobiology, again, looking at the key groups that are involved. But also, you know, there's opportunities to go into industry. We have I have a PhD student that's actually industry, and he's talking later in the series, who are building the instrumentations that are going to space to do this. I mean, that's an exciting job, to actually be building them. And these have kind of engineering or maths backgrounds, but it's all related to astrobiology and finding that evidence of life. So there's a whole way of doing it. And I think going forward, there's a lot of regulation work as well that's going on. So even if you're not a scientist, there's ways around, because apparently by 2030 the UK want to have a big percentage of the space sector budget, and I think the global space sector budget is going to be worth £30 billion by 2030. So it's a big sector to be getting into. So if you are, and if you are looking, further afield later on, space science is an area which is growing. There's a lot of money being put into it. You've all seen the news last week about satellites crashing. It's because there's so many up there, and these are all things that we need to think about.
Lucinda, I'll pass over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to add that absolutely you are so right. The UK has been investing millions of billions of pounds and dollars into the huge space satellite industry that they have here in the UK. So they've also invested in REB1, which is mega constellation, an idea to put up more satellites around our planet. And also Launchpad. I think they're looking at 7 launch facilities to be able to launch satellites themselves instead of relying on, I guess, ESA. So more private business, probably. I know in the United States, private space industry, obviously like SpaceX and Boeing, we're definitely moving towards a space future, which is making it more common, more normal, more everyday. I mean, I think we're talking more and more about how everything is connected to space that we use today, just like having this internet available to us, the technology, mobile phones. But in the field of astrobiology, definitely as well, because what are those satellites doing? They're giving us data. So again, like you mentioned, even if you're not a scientist, there's going to be something for everyone to do. Citizen science is huge these days, and there's going to be a lot of data to go through from all this experimentation that we're getting from these instruments, either landing on planetary bodies or orbiting moons of other planets. But to learn more about the environment around us.
And that's it. We can learn a lot from these satellites. Give us Earth observations, and it's something you touched on previously, Lucinda, was about planetary protection. All these individual identities. We need to make sure that we're working as one to make sure that we don't cause damage to space as well. So I think there's a lot of. I think space is going to be one of those topics over the next 10 years, which is going to be in the media. We've got missions to the icy moons, we've got Mars sample return. It's just a really exciting area to be in as well.
Definitely, with all these other nations getting involved. So not just the UK, of course, we have that are involved in all these, but now we have China, UAE at Mars this year. China's about to land on Mars for the first time. So it is definitely sort of a very, exciting time. I think I heard Manish Patel, who I think is also at the yesterday called it the golden age.
Yeah, the golden age.
Yeah.
I mean, it's later this month that China will be landing on Mars, which is exciting. And then, I've been working in people in Africa, and you've got Ethiopia, Nigeria. They've all got their own space agencies. So all these kind of developing countries are doing this, and that again is something really exciting. It's that global presence. It's not just one agency or 2 agencies. It's more than that now, and I think that is a really exciting opportunity for us.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to your questions, and I just wanted to mention this last kind of connection to astrobiology. Hello, it just landed in our back garden. We have meteorites that we collected in the UK, which hadn't landed. I think we hadn't had sort of these sorts of this sort of impact for 30 years of having meteorites in the UK that we could collect. So it's definitely part of our current the landscape here in the UK, astrobiology, looking for life in the solar system. So another question here from Alif: what are the options outside of academia for astrobiologists? So I touched on citizen science. Is there anything else that you can add to that?
Yeah, so I have space governance is a huge area at the moment, which is really, really big. I've just employed a space governance person, and this is looking at, again, the regulations around planet protection, also the satellites that you touched on. There's that whole area of law that's just not been developed. We can look at some of the, we have the Space Treaty, which was developed back in 1969, and time's gone on from that, and we can look at treaties on Earth, so for example, like the Antarctica Treaty as an analogue for that, but it needs to be, we still have a lot to learn going forward, because that was built when we just had kind of two major space agencies involved. So space governance is a huge area that I can see that's going to be becoming a real issue. There's opportunities, we've got the UK Space Agency in the UK, there's jobs, ESA as well. There's just lots of opportunities there as well. And I think there's jobs that you don't think about. I work with a group that are studying climate change, and they're using space data to do that. I have a project, and I haven't mentioned this, whereas this is a very bizarre way of doing. We're using space data to monitor areas where malaria could exist in Guyana. And then we're using rover technology that was built for ExoMars to detect that on the ground. And then using microbial work, which I did on the ISS, looking at survival, is growing microbes in the community, which we could then use as a biocontrol for malaria, using village, indigenous engagement. So there's a whole way there where, without actually thinking about it, you are engaged in astrobiology or space. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity, I think, going forward.
I'm going to pass the next question on to Joe, but I did want to say that that's the whole idea. And I love space exploration and discovery and adventure, but it's all about really what are we going to learn that can help us here on Earth as well, moving forward with all the issues that we have. So it's not just about what's out there. Out there is part of us. And I think that's what I'm always trying to communicate, at least as much as I can. Go ahead.
And Lucinda, I think also when I mentioned about early Earth, we can't study early Earth because of the tectonics. There's not a history. We can't. Evidence is very difficult, but we can look at Mars because it didn't have that kind of activity. So there's ways and means that we can learn from there to bring it back to Earth. And I think that is something when we think about we've got to go out and find life. There's a lot of information that we can develop, and also the technologies. We've mentioned the internet, we've mentioned Teflon. These are all things that were developed for the space race, which are helping us on Earth as well.
One is, and it's just something as I'm listening to you, thinking about the marketing of space and how we talk about space in schools and the career opportunities. And I think often we don't talk about how adaptable it is when you have scientists who are studying space and driving technology and engineering, and that how that floods into so many different careers and opportunities here on Earth. Do you think that there's a marketing problem or something that we're not talking about properly in education, and how can we solve that through the way that we communicate about these topics?
I think there's probably more people on this line that have more experience, the teachers on this, but I as I mentioned, I originally wanted to do marine biology at university, and I think the basic skills we learn in science can be applied to so many different things. And I think at school, I found, I'm talking a few years ago now, it was very dry about chemistry and biology, were very dry. And I think if we could use some of these examples, for example, space and astrobiology, to kind of teach them these key points. So I actually have an education expert in my group, and what we're trying to use is space and astrobiology as a mechanism to get some of these key STEM issues, key STEM curriculum points across, using astrobiology as a mechanism to do that. And it's, when you think about it, I talked a lot about biology at the beginning of this talk, and we could connect that might help with some of the work that can be done. And that's what we've been doing in Africa, in Ethiopia. We've been using kind of astrobiology and then natural environment to teach some of these kind of key STEM issues and concepts through space and analog work. So I think that's quite, there is an opportunity to do that. It just needs to be thought about. And there are resources. So I know that the Centre of Astrobiology in Edinburgh have developed teaching resources for astrobiology. We've been working with Dynamic Earth to make materials. So there is materials out there. And I think NASA have just released some in ESA. So it is something that is being considered. But I suppose it depends if teachers have time to actually do that. I think that's something that, particularly at the moment, they've got these core areas that they need to teach. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask a granular question, a problem with space exploration, which we've touched on briefly, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on. This is from Jim, and it says, what is the possibility of contamination from early land emissions where the cleanliness and hygiene controls were not as rigorous as they are today?
Well, Actually, the initial regulations back in the day is still, they're really relevant. We were really careful we didn't do that. I mean, if we look back at the Viking data, there was potential issues with organic contamination when we thought we had organics on the surface of Mars, but now we're analysing that data, we find that it's not. And I think this is something that we have been really careful about doing, and it's something that we are extremely concerned about going forward. And if you look at there are international guidelines on this which people adhere to, and it's very much based on the aim of the mission. So if it's looking for evidence of life, they're a bit more stringent. If you're landing on the planet, we have all these regulations, and basically that depends on the amount of bioburden or the amount of contamination it's allowed. They're very negligible amounts. They are really strict guidelines. So we do try our hardest not to do this. It's something that is something to be considered, but also that's even before they leave Earth. And then if we think about Mars, it's got a 6-month period in space where it's being exposed to high radiation and vacuum as well. So there's a lot of work that's been done in this area to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Lucinda, I'll pass over to you for any comments, but also we've got lots of questions still there that you can have a look at.
Yeah, there are a lot of great questions, and one that sort of touches like on the background. I'm as a field scientist and done lots of field work myself as a geologist. Jade asks, where's the best place you've been for field work?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to say the best place I've ever been is the Dalar region in Ethiopia, which is deemed the most extreme environment on Earth, and it just looks amazing. It's got lots of different colours. It's really extreme. It's like the pH is below 1. We have really high temperatures, but it's in the middle of this. It's the middle of this like salt desert, and it's got this little community, a village close by, and it's it's just an amazing place to go as a scientist, but also as somebody who's traveling. You're going there to do science, and these people in these communities are just trying to survive and are living off the land. So it's kind of a clash of cultures. And it's a fantastic place to go. My group's done field work all over the place: Botswana, Iceland, India, the US. So there's lots of analog sites out there which we can do, and that's something as an astrobiologist. If you like traveling, it is really good for that, because you go to some amazing places. Lucinda, you've done some amazing work in the States with analog works as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it took me out of the United States, actually, like New Zealand, where we had to be welcomed by a Maori family to stay with them. It was amazing. But the most life-altering fieldwork I've done is in the Pilbara in Australia, looking at 3.5 billion-year-old stromatolites, a very special, secure kind of science site that I was privileged to be a part of a NASA expedition. Looking for microbial, what did ancient microbial life look like, and what does what might the rovers find on Mars? What are they looking for? So that was just incredible, and nothing like being outdoors.
And that's it. As an astrobiologist, you can have a job sitting at your desk analysing data. You can be in the lab doing experiments, or you could be in the field, or a combination of all three. So that's quite a nice, if you're the kind of person that likes variation in your day or in your week, it's a nice opportunity to do, rather than just one kind of data collection.
I'm going to go to a question from John Zarnecki, who is a good friend of ours. Yeah, he had his hand raised from the very beginning. Remember I mentioned that to everyone. So his question, and he says here, from a gray-haired male professor, if you had to put money on which object in the solar system would be the first to show life, would you put your money on Enceladus, or Titan, or Mars, or Venus, or somewhere else?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, John was at the Open University when I joined as a PhD student, so this is nice to see you, John. I would say, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is here, Enceladus. But it's not just about finding life. To me, Enceladus, or the icy moons, is really exciting, because you could have another genesis for life. Because when we look at the solar system, if we did find life on Mars, we'd have to prove that it's indigenous to Mars, that it hasn't just been transferred through processes on meteorites, etc., from Earth. Whereas if we found life in the subsurface of Enceladus, it's completely closed off from anywhere else. So it would be a single genesis. And we know there's hydrothermic systems in the bottom of Enceladus. So potentially they could form some of the biomolecules for life. And finally, some of the modeling that we've done in our group has demonstrated that the composition of the oceans could actually be conducive to life. So that's where I'm putting my money, is on Enceladus. That's where I'd make the decision to go.
There you have it, John, from the Director of Astrobiology. Joe, any questions from you?
Yeah, you were talking about meteorites and potentially life on those. I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to merge together, talking about microbes in space, how they can exist there, where there might be exposure over the 6-month journey you were talking about from Mars back to Earth, or vice versa. And also the other one was about, microbial life being transferred other than through human intervention.
Okay, so there's been a lot of work that's looked at microbial survival in space. So there was a long-term experiment about 10 years ago where they put microbes in space for 6 years and looked at the impact of the space environment, low Earth orbit, on them. Also, we use the International Space Station to do a lot of this work. We know that if they're not protected, so there's no filters on them, that the microbes that we sent into space just can't survive. But what you do get is you can still pick up some remnants of them through the biosignature detection, and that's why we do it, because we can look for so we can look at how biosignatures degrade over time. So there has been a lot of work. I think, as I mentioned before, probably over 1,000 species of microbes have been sent up into space over the time period. Because we kind of have these big international projects where we do that. So there's that work. And then the question about transfer of microbes. Yeah, this is something, this whole concept of lithopanspermia is that microbes, we know that meteorites exist and that we have these impacts which could produce this material and potentially could be transferred. Now, there's an experiment called the stone experiment where we simulated a massive stone flowing through the atmosphere of Earth and looked at if microbes can survive. They can't really survive on the outward side of it, but there's nothing that's saying if they were embedded in the meteorite or in the rock itself that they couldn't survive. So that is something that, that is a potential. This kind of work's all ongoing at the moment, and it's quite topical conversation to have, not just from a scientific perspective, but also from the planetary protection perspective when we're looking at bioburden and numbers and how stringent we need to be going forward.
Do you think there's a potential for our understanding of microbes and viruses and all of these things that we feel like we've kind of ticked off, we've done pretty well, where biology is pretty well embedded, but there might be developments to understand them better in a new context in different environments? Yeah,
I think that there is. There's lots of work looking at that, actually not outside the International Space Station, but inside, looking at microgravity and the effect of microbes on microgravity that we couldn't do on Earth as well. And also there's a whole area of microbiology, which is looking at if we could use microbes for in situ resource utilization. So Lucinda, we talked about human exploration. One option for this would be that we'd use microbes to kind of biomine resources that we wouldn't need to take with us. There's this whole idea called, it's like a biological loop, where it basically is a system that they kind of want to develop for space travel and potentially for settlements, is that, they take human waste and they process it with microbes, and they kind of have this whole, breakdown of produce, and then they can, this kind of this whole idea, basically using microbiology again. So, I think going forward, yes, we need to learn about microbes for adaptation and origins of life and the fundamentals, but also going forward, microbiology in astrobiology has huge applications for these future missions, these potential human missions that we're looking at in the future.
Excellent. That's really great to know. And absolutely, so many things get recycled on the International Space Station. You know, we need microbes. I think they also just recently found fungus, which I'm a huge fan of fungus because obviously you can eat some of them, you can build with some of them. I mean, these are things that we kind of go, ooh, we don't want to know, you know, but I think we really need to learn more about and educate ourselves on their importance in, you know, the evolution of life and in keeping us also as a species on this planet too. So Joe, do you mind if I jump to something on the ISS? Great.
Please.
Okay, so someone from our YouTube channel, thank you, Joe, for alerting me that there are questions on the YouTube. Most of them I think we've answered, but a couple of them, one here in Zoom and one on YouTube. So asks, what's the significance of the unique bacteria recently identified on the International Space Station? I don't know if you have heard of that. I didn't realize that. And then another question is asking about a carbon-13 isotopic signature of methane on Mars. Does it indicate a possible biogenic origin?
Yeah, so we'll start with the methane one. This is an area of conversation because we don't know what the atmospheric composition of Mars is. This is quite a complex one, which is kind of an ongoing discussion. I'm not an expert in isotopes, but it is something that's being considered. But what we have with the TGO, which is now part of the ExoMars mission, which is orbiting around Mars, is what the idea was when they built that they would be able to measure the methane to ethane ratio as a proxy for microbial life potentially. So that's something that, you know, they are looking at the makeup of the methane and the ratios with other compounds to see if it is of biogenic origin. But that's something that is ongoing. The International Space Station's work, this is the isolate that was isolated inside the International Space Station. Is this the one we're talking about?
He didn't specify, this person did not specify DC BAS.
Okay.
Just recently identified on the ISS. It didn't say inside or out.
I haven't read one of being isolated on the outside. I feel I need to go and read that paper. I apologize there, because I know that JP, I know in the States what they're doing is that they're developing a way of sampling the outside of the International Space Station. So this could be linked to that work that they're doing. But for, you know, inside the ISS, yes, that doesn't really surprise me because you've got all your human microbes that you take up, and yeah, I think it's something that we just need to see what it is, how it's adapted to it, and if there is something of interest there. I mean, there's been a lot of studies looking into how the human biota is influenced by on the ISS. So they've done an experiment with twins. One went up, one stayed at home, and how that affected the microbiome, which I think is a really interesting study. So I think there's a lot we can learn on the effects of that on that work.
Yeah, those are the Kelly twins, I believe, and I think I read his book when he came back.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, don't ask me any questions for it. I don't remember how to go back and read it. Joe, I have a burning question, but I'm going to hand it back to you if you give me some time at the end, if there's anything you wanted to ask.
You can definitely go now. Okay,
great. So we are wrapping up here. We're almost at 1 o'clock. It's been amazing with you, and thank you for everyone for all your questions. And Jade, thank you so much. You've been asking lots of really questions. Hopefully you're a future astrobiologist, or you're already one. But Jade brings up the study of exoplanets. And I think even, you know, we can continue to look for exoplanets even under this pandemic. So I think this year in 2021, we have over 4,000 confirmed exoplanets that we can see from here, from Earth, that we can study, because it's such a huge, vast sky. We can only look at small parts of it. So that's just in the small parts that we've looked at. So what do you think about the future of astrobiology with this finding of exoplanets? I
think the exoplanet area is a really interesting area, and it's going to be really exciting coming forward. I think as my work, you know, I've traditionally focused on the solar system, but I've been having these conversations with more people, and the way that the field's going, I think exoplanets is going to be something to keep your eye on in the future. And this is where astronomy fits in, isn't it? This is we've talked about biology and geology, but this is something where, as an astronomist, you could be doing some key work for looking at exoplanets and helping to identify some of these planets. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really hot topic going forward over the next, I think, the next 5 to 10 years.
It's going to keep us very busy, actually. And there's so much data coming back from these incredible instruments that we have built to put in space, not let alone landing on surfaces of some of these bodies or orbiting them. And now we're looking beyond our solar system, and with this, a number this large, there's going to be a lot of work to do. So I think that's it for us. Joe, we're already past 1 o'clock. That went by so fast. And Professor Olsson-Francis, I always call you Karen, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you enjoyed this. Oh, we promised to show the video. What should we do, Joe?
If we've got time, I think let's show the video, or we can post the link on everywhere if it doesn't quite work out. Do you want to try and share it?
Have you ever looked up at the stars and wondered, are we alone? It's one of those fundamental questions that humans have thought about for thousands of years, and the search for that answer is what drives the field of astrobiology. Astrobiology is the study of life in our universe, and it brings together lots of different types of science, such as biology, chemistry, physics, geology, and astronomy. Astrobiologists want to find out how life began, how it evolved, and where in the universe we might find it. The best example conditions to that of Earth when life evolved here. We can see evidence of dried up river channels and lakes on Mars, so maybe Mars could have supported life. How would we tell that there was life there? We could look for footprints from little green aliens, but that would be unlikely. Astrobiologists think that life elsewhere in the universe is probably microscopic. So how would you detect these microscopic life forms? You could look for things that the microbes have left behind. Astrobiologists call these biosignatures. There is a complication though. Life exists pretty much everywhere on Earth, including in some of the harshest environments. We find microscopic life at the bottom of the oceans, inside glaciers, in the deserts, even high up in the atmosphere. The organisms that can survive these extreme conditions are called extremophiles. Different extremophiles can tolerate extremes of pressure, temperature, radiation, salinity, acidity, or can live without sunlight or oxygen. There are places with these conditions on Earth similar to those we might find elsewhere in the universe. So, astrobiologists use these analog sites to understand if and how organisms live in these environments. But that just covers life as we know it. What about extraterrestrial life? No, I'm not talking about those little green things again. What if life could exist on Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter? Europa is about the same size as our own moon, but it's covered by a shell of ice. Underneath the ice is an ocean. What if there was life there? What would it look like? To find out more, we need to send instruments into space to explore these distant worlds. So it seems like astrobiologists have lots of work to do and lots of questions to answer. But we can probably sum up all of those questions into one big question. Are we alone?
That was great. Thank you so much for being with us. I just want to remind everyone that we are having another astrobiology event next Thursday, same time from 12 to 1. Thank you from Lucinda at the RAS for being with us.
And thank you from Joe from the Linnean Society. See you again next week.